we're back with another episode of On the Record with Tiffany, and we're going to revisit some of our previous information in regards to legislation here in the great state of Texas with one of my favorite representatives, Representative Erin Zwiener. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Just trying to stay out of this Texas heat. It's been sweltering here in San Antonio, where we're located.
It has sure been warm. And of course, it's had that trademark Texas humidity where you go outside and get a free sauna treatment.
Right. And you're breathing fire. It feels like you're just breathing fire every time you walk outside. Maybe that's why I'm such a dragon when it comes down to going after legislation and stuff that we need to get right in this state. Um, Well, the last time I had you on, we were talking about a wonderful critical infrastructure piece that you wrote and authored, House Bill 2275, and that bill made it was amended to Senate Bill 3 and voted in on May 24th. But then on May 30th was in a closed session. It was stripped out of Senate Bill 3. Can you tell us uh, first? Can you recap what the critical infrastructure bill was, and then can we talk about why it was stripped out?
Of course, House Bill 2275 is a piece of legislation I worked on to try and improve the resiliency of our local utilities and our healthcare facilities. So what it would have done is create a grant program that we would have planned on funding with some federal dollars that come from the American Rescue Plan. And that grant program would have funded resiliency grants for our local electric utilities, our local water utilities, and for backup generation for our hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living centers, and dialysis centers.
Yes.
And I was inspired to file this because of the blackout. We already had been working on some legislation to try and modernize our grid, and the winter storm sure pointed out the need for that and pointed out the need for greater resiliency across the board. Official counts of storm deaths are still under 200, but BuzzFeed News actually did some investigative reporting. They do that, I swear. I know everyone thinks of BuzzFeed as a place for quizzes, but they actually have a great investigative team. And they looked at excess deaths during the storm, and it looks like the real number is in the 700s. And we can presume that those are mostly medical deaths, people who were unable to access the type of healthcare they needed, and therefore ended up dying when they otherwise would not have. And I say we can presume those are mostly medical because if it was something like hypothermia or an injury or carbon monoxide poisoning, it probably would have been more accurately categorized as a storm death. But because these deaths were presumably medical, they might not have necessarily been tied back to the winter storm. So looking at that, we knew that to keep Texans safe, we need more resiliency. And we've seen that just last week when the Texas grid is once again flying a little too close to the sun, a little too close for comfort for a lot of us. Mm-hmm. And we have to have backup plans for our backup plans. And resiliency is how we do that. So it was a piece of legislation that I was going to create the structure for us to come in and fund with federal dollars. It passed through the House with a supermajority, went over to the Senate, and the lieutenant governor never referred it to committee. So that bill never got a hearing, never got a chance for a hearing in the Senate. So fast forward a couple weeks, Senate Bill 3 is on the floor on the House side. I worked with the chair of State Affairs, Chris Patty. We added the bill as an amendment. House voted on it again. A super majority of the House voted to move it forward. And my understanding is the lieutenant governor was just not interested in those provisions. And I think that's really unfortunate because we only have 3 choices here. The choice is to not invest in the resiliency of our utilities and our healthcare facilities and risk suffering that we've already seen happen. The second choice is for us to do that and to pass that cost on to consumers, which Texans are already seeing spikes in their bills related to the electric storm. I don't think passing that cost onto consumers right now is particularly fair. Or the third option is we take some of the $16.7 billion of federal money we have to spend and use that to address these resiliency projects. I think the third option is by far the best choice for the people of Texas, both fiscally and for their health and safety. So I was disappointed it didn't make it across the finish line. That said, we're going to have another bite at this apple. I don't know if you want me to get into that yet, Tiffany, or if you want me to take my time.
Are you thinking about specials?
Question, and I took over, but yeah, we're going to have at least 2 special sessions, and we don't know everything will be on those special session calls. That's at the discretion of the governor. But one of the things he's already indicated and publicly committed to is that the fall special session, we're going to take up redistricting, and then we're also going to take up spending that $16.7 billion of undedicated funds from the American Rescue Plan. And so when we take up how to spend that, I'm going to be there fighting for us to spend it on infrastructure.
Well, I will be there with you, girl, because I've already sent out, now I'm with my other hat, I'm wearing my host hat today, but my day job is with Texas Kidney Foundation. And we sent a letter of support in favor of the critical infrastructure. We copied them on what you so valiantly put together, and we said, you just reenacted the chronic kidney disease task force, all of these different aspects of paying attention to vulnerable populations. You can't just abandon what we know is in the best interest of vulnerable populations. And there are certain groups that cannot be without lights and water. And dialysis patients must have potted water. They have to have electricity. Wonderful things that you included in that bill was smart meters. Technology that has been around, by the way, and that should have been enacted and utilized in Texas without having to pass legislation to get it into the great state of Texas. We have to get back to doing the things that are right because they are right, not because we're trying to divide against party lines, or because we're trying to save money where we shouldn't be trying to. In certain cases, you have to spend money. And in regards to our infrastructure, if we don't spend money, this one-time cost, we are going to pay tremendously. What was the cost burden to the state of Texas for Winter Storm Uri? The cost, a fraction of that cost would have handled what we're dealing with in terms of our infrastructure being upgraded. A fraction of the cost, because it was over $1 trillion to Uri.
Not spending those dollars earlier has cost us more in the long run.
It's cost us a lot of money,
both in dollars, but also in human lives, also in business reputation of the state of Texas. We just had an announcement this past week that an electric vehicle company decided to locate their plant in Oklahoma instead of in Texas because of concerns about the reliability of the grid. This is something that has an effect all across the state of Texas, and we have to do some work to fix it. And you mentioned smart meters. I think it's a great time to talk about them because they've been in the news a little bit because some people figured out that they were signed up with smart meters and also with programs with their smart thermostats that allowed their power company to adjust the thermostat in their house. Quite frankly, a lot of people were a little surprised, didn't realize they had signed up for these programs. But I want to say they are fantastic programs that are part of what made sure we kept the lights on during the conservation notice last week. And the great thing about programs like that is they do offer an incentive to consumers to do that, so that individual Texans are getting these incentives to conserve, instead of just big industrial companies who currently have contracts with ERCOT to use less electricity during times and get paid for it. So if big companies are going to get paid, let's get individual Texans paid too. But the great thing about smart meters from the area you're more concerned about, Tiffany, is they allow a power company to be much more specific in how they do a rolling black or brownout. What we saw during the winter storm is that most power companies, the way their circuits were set up is they had to turn individual neighborhoods on and off. It was big swaths of homes that they could turn on and off at once. But if you have smart meters at a home, you can do it down to that individual meter. And you can also tell if a house is receiving power or not. That's something that was a big deal because at least in my corner of the world where we had a ton of ice damage, well as the rolling blackouts, we had issues where Pedernales Electric Co-op would come turn the power back on for a neighborhood, assume everybody's outage was fixed and not realize the back corner of the neighborhood had a line down and didn't have any power still. Smart meters let your meter talk to the power company in real time so they know if they have power or not. And it lets them go and be very particular and do it house by house. So let's say we're in a situation, we need to do a rolling blackout. We need everybody to lose power for an hour, but we're going to take turns. It would allow them to come down a street and say, we're going to turn off all these houses, except this one, who's told us that they depend on an oxygen machine, or that they have a home dialysis system, or they have some other medical need to not lose power. And it would allow them to protect those particular homes while still being able to have the impact of a rolling outage in terms of saving the grid from catastrophe, which is the reason you do a rolling blackout in the first place, is to keep from losing the whole grid. So it gives the companies a lot more flexibility, allows them to be very particular in who loses power and who doesn't, and also allows them, if there is an outage that isn't a rolling blackout, something that's physical line damage, it would allow them to go prioritize the homes that they know need that power back to save lives. So there's just a huge amount of advantages. And then energy.
There's no downside to it. There really isn't.
There really is.
You're listening to On the Record with Tiffany on 9:30 a.m. The Answer. And come on back and listen to us a little bit more, because we are going to talk about what you can do as a Texan to promote us getting this through. And we're back with my special guest, Representative Erin Zwiener. She is the author of what I think is one of the best pieces of legislation that I saw come through this past session, and it is the Critical Infrastructure Bill, which would support vulnerable populations and actually help with resiliency for our power grid. So let's talk about what we can do to make this come to fruition, because we're not dead in the water yet, people. We can band together and get this going.
Yeah, well, we are expecting special sessions this year. The joke is that there's nothing special about a special session. It's mostly stuff. But the governor calls the special session and he says what we can discuss as a legislature. He names the topics. Obviously, we still decide how to get there. He has already publicly said that one of the things that will be on the call for our fall special session is spending $16.7 billion of money we have from the American Rescue Plan. That's a federal piece of legislation related to COVID. And there's a big pot of money that has very few rules. We are not allowed to use it to reduce taxes, according to the federal government, and we are not allowed to use it for pension programs. Other than that, we have a huge amount of flexibility. One of the most fiscally responsible things we can do is spend it on infrastructure. It's the big worry when you get a huge pot of federal money is that you'll spend it somewhere and then you create this expectation of funding, but we don't have the federal revenues in the next biennium, and therefore we have to cut a program. We don't want to create programs just to cut them. So what we want to do is put them into good one-time expenses, things where there's an immediate need, but that we don't necessarily need to fund the next biennium. So things like infrastructure are perfect. And we are ripe to modernize our utility infrastructure. We are ripe to invest in things like smart meters and demand response programs that help us keep the lights on and avoid widespread outages. We are ripe to invest in our water utilities to make sure they can keep the water flowing, because we talk a lot about the power going out during the blackout, but over half of Texans did not have potable water in the days after the storm. So investing in our water utilities is critical too. And it's also critical to make sure that our healthcare facilities are able to keep the lights on regardless of what happens with the grid. So these are one-time investments. They would put Texans to work, so they would actually help stimulate the economy as well. All of these are things that have to physically be built and installed by someone.
It's a very fiscally responsible move for us to make. And as Texans, we have consistently, I mean, that's a part of the Texas mantra, if there ever were one, is fiscal responsibility. So for us to, when we're looking at this, that should be the prime focus on for everybody that's making this decision. We should be focused on what is fiscally responsible, what is responsible in terms of human life. This is a win-win across the board, because you can't afford to not upgrade our critical infrastructure. It has to be done. The question is, how is it going to be done? So your three possibilities that ends with us utilizing this money that's already coming in from the federal government. It's the best, most reliable way that we can do this. We just have to structure it in such a manner that Texans benefit and that we get the work done that should be done.
Absolutely agree. And what we really need is for everyone to reach out to your state rep, your state senator, the lieutenant governor, the governor, and tell them that that's how you want to see us spend this $16.7 billion.
Yeah. Ask them to spend it on you.
You. We need to spend it on our infrastructure. So
that's right. Show that you have, let's show Texans that we care about Texans. And the way that we do that is we spend the money on critical infrastructure, the very thing that supports every single human being that is in this state. There is not a single person in the state of Texas who is not affected by lights and water being disrupted.
100%.
If it happens in your area, you are affected by it. We all have electricity, we all have water. So let's fix the very things that must be fixed. They have to be fixed, period. There, no, hard stop. This has to be fixed. We don't have an option not to fix it. And every time we have any sort of weather issue, we are facing problems with the critical infrastructure. We just saw that, like 2 weeks ago, you were discussing earlier. We just saw that with the heat wave. There are many different ways that we can have problems with critical infrastructure that don't look exactly like Winter Storm Uri. But this is not a question of if this will happen again. It is a question of when it will happen again. And will we be prepared when it does? So if you've never reached out to your senator or your representative or the lieutenant governor or the governor's office, now's the time for you to do that. Because we have a voice and you have agency. You have power. You have more power than you think, and your power is within your pen. It's at your keyboard. Reach out to those, reach out to whoever is your representative, and reach out to the governor's office to let them know that you don't ever want to see another Winter Storm Uri, and you do want to see critical infrastructure resiliency.
And here's the other thing I'll say, Tiffany, is folks shouldn't just email, they shouldn't just call, ask for a meeting. You know, in the last days of session, we really don't have space to take constituent meetings. April, May, they're too wild for us. We're too booked. But now that it's the interim, we have space to take those meetings. Our staff has space to take those meetings. What I tell folks is usually you should be able to get a meeting with your state rep one-on-one. That should be doable. Provided it's not April or May in a session year, then we're just, but your state senator, you might need to meet with staff, but it's still worth asking them for a meeting personally. And then use that time to talk about why it's important. That's how you get an issue on our radar and make sure we follow it and chase it and keep it in our view throughout the process. And even if you aren't able to have that meeting, the number of contacts that make an impression on us are surprisingly small. Not enough people reach out to our elected. So just a dozen folks reaching out and saying, hey, what are you doing to make sure we get funding for this? That makes a real impression on elected officials. Just a dozen. And I know everybody on this knows a dozen neighbors that they can talk to and work with to reach out to their elected officials and really make a splash.
Because it's something that that affects every Texan, and affects every city. It affects every rural space. So if you're within our earshot, if you're within earshot of this broadcast, ask for a meeting. Reach out to your senator, reach out to your representative, and ask for a meeting. I love that because I've met with representatives, and you're right. You know, you have a few minutes to actually get your point across as to why this is important. And those personal stories about what happened to you during the winter storm, those resonate with your representatives and senators. Always remember, this is Texas. We are a family in this state. And when you go and see your state rep and your senators, what you will find is that regardless of their political affiliation, they're going to be warm to you and listen to what you have to say, because they are elected officials. They didn't get into the job because they hate people. They got into the job because they believe in our state and what can be done and accomplished within this state. So remember, you can talk to them. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you do. And this is an important matter. It's important enough for you to, for us to pick up our phones and get to our keyboards to request time on their schedule so that we can talk about what really matters, and that's human life and the preservation of it. And improving our critical infrastructure does exactly that. It preserves human life. We will not have the deaths that we experienced during this last winter storm. We can prevent some of that. And you've been listening to On the Record with Tiffany on 9:30 a.m. The Answer, where we bring on people of all different persuasions, different political ideologies, so that we can understand the full spectrum of what's going on. And thank you so much, Representative Zwiener. She's going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about what we can expect next session and how we're going to impact the world for Texans, the world of Texas, which is all of the world to us. Oh, you've been listening to On the Record with Tiffany. And we're back with Representative Erin Zwiener, and we're talking about special session. because we believe that critical infrastructure should be viewed during special session. And since the governor has said that he's going to look at what's going on with how we're going to spend the 16 billion that's coming from the federal government, then we still have a shot at critical infrastructure. So for those of us who are regular folks, uh, when special session comes, are we allowed to come in and speak? What happens during special session? Can you tell us that?
Well, I should own this will be my first special session as an elected official. I was frequenting the Capitol during the 2017 special session, but more in the activist capacity. Absolutely, folks can come in during the special session, talk to your elected officials, talk to other folks. When you talk to people who represent you, quantity, like the quantity of constituents reaching out to you is always valuable. When you talk to folks who aren't your elected official, focus on quality, that person who has that story about what the blackout meant to them, that is impactful and moves somebody. That's the stories to use for the people who don't represent you. Don't use form emails for people who don't represent you. They're fine for people who do. But you can come into the Capitol, do activism. It's going to be, I think, much easier and more active now that so many of us are vaccinated. I know my office, was not open outside of appointments this past session. I think that's something we'll be able to change now that everyone in our office is vaccinated. And so I expect it'll be very robust, and we will have hearings on legislation like we do during other sessions or during a normal session, and members of the public will have the opportunity to come testify. Now, special sessions are only 30 days long, so there's not as much time as there normally is to do this work. And so it's really important that people be ready and talking to people in advance. Now, we don't know what the topic of this special session is going to be yet. The governor has announced the date, July 8th, but he has not announced the topics. And we can only work on issues that Governor Abbott puts on the call for the special session. So we're waiting for that. I don't believe this is going to be the session where we talk about spending the $16.7 billion. My understanding is that will happen in the fall. But with everything that just happened with the electric grid and the fact that we were under a conservation notice last week, it is very possible that the special session will include something related to ERCOT and resiliency in the blackouts. So this work on resiliency for the grid and our medical facilities very well may fit into that call.
Well, I will be primed for that. Okay, so if we are trying to get ourselves ready for this call, I mean, let's look at that. That's just what, 2 or 3 weeks away. That's not very far. What would you do to prepare if you were a regular citizen?
I would follow the news. The biggest thing is figuring out what is going to be on the call. The thing we all anticipate will be on this one is, I'm going to try and say it with a straight face, but voter integrity. But the elections bill that Texas Democrats that I was one of, walked out on last session. That's the issue that the governor has publicly said will be on this call.
And that's probably going to take up most of the call.
That will take up a lot of the time. But so we will see what else comes up and is part of that. But we just have to wait and see. It really is at the governor's discretion.
Well, I'm still of the mindset that we need to write as many letters and take as many meetings as we can with our representatives so that we get critical infrastructure on everybody's radar, because it's, just looking at a couple of weeks ago, I'm like, this is going to happen sooner rather than later. We're going to have a major problem with this sooner rather than later. And the heat in Texas alone, I mean, we're not even into July yet, and we're already having to conserve energy for air conditioning. So imagine what we're going to be like in August.
Absolutely. No, I mean, we definitely have concerns about reliability. This recent conservation notice was instigated because three things happened at once. One is that we had a very surprising number of thermal generation under what's called a forced outage. Now, forced outage is not maintenance. Maintenance is like you stop to get your tires rotated. Generation do that and schedule it normally. A forced outage is your tire blew out on the side of the road and you have to stop and fix it before you can drive on. So what facilities are telling us is they have forced outages, something's broken and they have to stop and fix it. So we had an unusual amount of that, over twice the number that ERCOT projects for. And then we had a lull in wind production, and then we had hotter than normal temperatures for June. So those three things combined meant that we did not anticipate, or we were worried that we would not have enough electricity to meet demand. So that's why ERCOT worked with industrial consumers and large commercial to lower their demand. It's why they issued the conservation notice to ask Texans to take measures to save electricity. And it worked. We managed to get 3,000 megawatts below what the projected demand was going to be because of all of our work on conservation. So good job, everybody. But it's nerve-wracking to see that this combination of unanticipated things happened in June. And we all know we have 3 more months of hot weather. Shoot, the hottest days I ever remember are always in September. And it means that we're really worried about being caught on our back foot and having major outage issues for the state. Now, the cold is dangerous in some very specific ways, particularly because we were all iced in during the winter storm. But the heat can be very dangerous here in Texas too. So we do have to be aware of that. And then the folks who rely on medical equipment, that needs power regardless of what temperature it is outside.
Well, and we also have, remember, we have our hurricane season coming up. And
right.
Texas, flooding could be just as devastating to critical infrastructure as a winter storm or as a heat wave, because of the water situation and electricity both being impacted by flooding. And I mean, there's a multitude of ways that our critical infrastructure can be challenged. And every one that we mentioned, in its current state, our critical infrastructure is not prepared for it.
Absolutely. No, and I think that's a great thing about a resiliency project is it helps keep the lights on, helps keep the water flowing, helps keep our healthcare facilities open, whether it's a hurricane, a tornado, a flood, a power outage, a winter storm, a terrorist attack. Any of those situations, us investing in resiliency helps keep Texans safe. It is all about being prepared. I come from a family full of Boy Scouts. My dad was an Eagle Scout. 2 of my uncles were. My grandfather was. My brother's an Eagle Scout. And they taught me always be prepared. And the state of Texas,
my brother was a Boy Scout. My dad was over his troop, and it's the same. That's right. You always got to be prepared. That's the mantra, man. That's it.
Absolutely. Have backups for your backups.
That's right. That's right. And that's, that's a very Texan phrase there that you keep saying. I love your boots. You like taking pictures in those cute little boots. Yes, you have to have backups for your backups. That's part of us being independent and just willing to go to the wire for the things that we believe in this state and for the values that we hold. That's one of the values. Backups for your backup. We were always prepared. And we were not prepared with our critical infrastructure. We are not prepared with it right now. But through good old Texas ingenuity, our wonderful representative, Erin Zwiener, has a wonderful plan that will render Texans prepared should we choose to utilize it. And I am saying we should. We should utilize this because it is the best way for us to make sure that we take care of the least of these and make sure that we take care of everyone else as well. You're listening to On the Record with Tiffany, and stay with us because we're going to wrap this up with uh, Representative Sweener, and we're going to talk a little bit about her story and how she got involved in all of this. She's got some interesting historic first moments. You know, we had a historic first moment this week with Juneteenth being declared a national holiday, and for me as an African American woman, that was a great thing because I know the shoulders that I stand on every time I'm on this show and doing the work that I do, and by day, my day hat with Texas Kidney Foundation, much of which I wouldn't have been able to do were it not for slaves being freed, were it not for the very people that I hail from being recognized as human and more than just two-thirds of a man or woman. So uh, this has been a great week, and I'm looking forward to talking with the representative a little bit more about her history. I love hearing about uh, the history of strong women who are killing it in this state, and this representative is one of them. You've been listening to On the Record with Tiffany on 9:30 a.m. The Answer, where we bring people of all different types on so we can hear everybody's view. And we're back with Representative Sweener. So, Representative Sweener, you're a sophomore and you have managed to start two new caucuses that have never been there before. So, first, I'm going to let you pick which one you want to talk about first. Do you want to talk about energy or do you want to talk about LGBTQ?
Well, let's talk about energy a little bit since it's a more direct tie, and then we'll go to LGBTQ.
Okay.
Yeah, this session, I founded a caucus with several of my colleagues, the Climate, Environment, and Energy Industry Caucus. Yeah, I have been a lifelong conservationist, always very passionate about the environment, and was disappointed when I joined the legislature to see that environmental issues were often on the back burner. And climate change is urgent. You know, climate change is a factor in the extreme heat we have been seeing this month. Climate change is a factor in the winter storm because we talk about global warming, but global weirding is a better way to think about it. But Texas is a state that is deeply integrated with the energy industry. And to move forward on climate change, we also have to adapt our energy industry at the same time. We can't leave Texas workers behind, but we can't ignore climate change. But we're positioned really well to be energy leaders here in the new energy economy that we see shifting around us every day. So we founded this caucus. I've honored that 29 of my colleagues have joined. So a fifth of the members of the House are now members of this caucus.
Wow.
And so we started the caucus this session thinking it would be a little bit of a slow session for us, brand new caucus, hadn't had time to do fundraising specifically for the caucus or get caucus staff. And then we had a blackout that occurred right at the intersection of all of our issues. And so we were able to bring together panels of independent experts, people who unfortunately were not invited to testify on the blackout, and talk about some of these issues, particularly some of these resiliency issues and some of the strategies to reduce energy demand. So it's been a great tool to organize us around environmental issues in the Capitol and climate issues. And I'm so glad we started it in just in time for a blackout. So this was just our first session, but I've got big hopes for the caucus. We're going to do a lot of fundraising in the interim, and I hope next session we'll be able to have a fellowship program where we bring in young Texans with environmental science and climate science and energy industry expertise and have them work in the building on policy, because that's how we get a lot of sustainable change, is we get people who are passionate about these issues working in the Capitol.
So what made you decide, okay, seeing that people weren't, that the energy issues were falling to the back burner, conservation issues were falling to the back burner, uh, how did you pick like the first people to approach about your caucus?
Yeah, I reached out to some of my colleagues from around the state. I can't remember exactly how many founding members we had. It was 15 or 16. But I wanted to have a broad swath of people from different parts of the state. So I made sure to get some of my colleagues from Dallas who I knew were passionate about these issues, some of my colleagues from El Paso, some of my colleagues from the Houston area, some of my colleagues from San Antonio in the Valley. We wanted a broad group because that makes us strong. Too often, people from my corner of the world near Austin get dismissed as being, the wackadoo enviros in Texas. But we have environmental advocates in every part of the state. And what that looks a little bit different on the ground for each individual person. And that's great. That's fine. It is going to be different. And so we have a group of officers, my vice chair, Ron Reynolds, our first vice chair is from Fort Bend County. Second vice chair, John Rosenthal, is actually an energy industry engineer. He's from Harris County. Gina Hinojosa from here in Austin serves as the secretary, and Jasmine Crockett from up in Dallas serves as the treasurer. So we've got a great group of folks engaged and members from every part of Texas. And to me, that's what's really critical in making sure we were successful, is that we started with a broad group and worked from there. And our membership has more than doubled since we founded.
So when you say you're a conservationist, what does that mean?
It means I care about the natural world and believe that it's important for us to focus on. And that's both for the natural world on its own and also how it interacts with us as humans. But in general, what is good for the natural world is also good for us. Clean air, clean water are critical things to keep Texans safe and healthy. And that's something that actually has been made even more clear by the COVID-19 pandemic, because one of the theories for why we've seen disproportionate impacts on people of color from COVID-19 is exposure to air pollution, because we know that our communities of color are more likely to be exposed to high levels of pollutants. Recreational access is also incredibly important. Every Texas kid deserves places to play and explore outside. Not every kid has that. One small but very big and important win for me this session is we actually allocated money in the state budget for state park acquisition. We don't have anywhere near the parks we need in Texas to meet the recreational needs of Texans, much less needs for wildlife or ecosystem services. And so that was a big win to me, that we were able to get money for new parks in the state of Texas. I think conservation also means thinking about the long term. It's the idea is it's not just about your children, it's about their children and their children, and trying to plan for the future generations and leaving the planet a little bit better than we found it.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of making a smaller carbon footprint, recycling things, and not, with my husband and me and my kids, we just moved to a new house. And when we did, I was like, we're not buying anything new. We're not buying any new stuff. We're gonna, if we buy something, then it will be gently used, and we'll just make it fit, because you don't have to have a house full of new furniture when you move to a new house. You don't have to have everything, spank brand new when you move to a new space. That reduces what's going into our landfill, that reduces, and it makes you appreciative of what you have, as opposed to just buying a bunch of stuff. So I agree with you on that. Can you tell us a little bit about your other caucus that you started?
Yes. So when I was, oh, let me actually go back a little bit. I was elected in 2018. Before I was elected, there were 2 out LGBTQ members in the Texas legislature. The session before that, there was only 1. So,
Wow.
or I'm sorry, it was 2 sessions back, there was only 1. And before that, there had never been more than 1 LGBTQ issue serving at any time. So the 2018 elections happened. 3 more out LGBTQ women were elected, bringing it to a total of 5 of us in the legislature. And then in 2020, we elected a 6th. So, but in 2018, one of my colleagues, Representative Mary Gonzalez, went, "This is so exciting. We now have 5 out members. Let's start a caucus." And we did it. The 5 of us founded the caucus. We all served in the first officer positions. And it's still going strong, and it's been a really important tool for us to organize, to push back against bad legislation. You know, the sad thing, especially as we talk about these issues that are so critical, like the grid and healthcare and climate change, is that the legislature spends way too much time picking culture wars. And LGBTQ folks are one of the frequent targets. And so we've been able to organize, mitigate bills to make them not as bad, but preferably just stop bad bills in their tracks. We did stop all anti-LGBTQ bills this past session. And then hopefully, as Texans continue to advocate for it and as more elected officials come on board, hopefully we'll be able to pass some good legislation, things like the Equality Act that makes sure Texans aren't discriminated against in the workplace or in housing or in education because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Those are the things we're working towards, and it's just been a phenomenal group of people to work with.
Well, I commend you for standing up for what you believe in the legislation, because this is a difficult thing to do. You know, especially right now. There's so much going on that it's almost it doesn't make sense to me for us to hone in on LGBTQ when we've got major problems happening. Why are we trying to go into somebody else's personal life and root around? I've never understood why that has even been a political tool that some people want to use.
It's unfortunate, and it is unfortunate that we spend so much time, picking fights that. Mm-hmm. And I say we. I'm not the one picking this fight. Let me be
exactly.
But we
exactly. It's other people picking fights.
You have a party that's empowered.
Just willing to stand up for yourself, and that's good.
You have a party that's in power in this state, and they have primary elections, and the folks making the decision in a lot of those primaries are very reactionary and often punch down at communities of color. They punch down at the LGBTQ community, and they attack women's healthcare access a lot. And so those become major points of debate every legislative session. And I want to be frank, it's exhausting and it leads to bad governance. And this maybe brings everything back full circle, Tiffany. This past session, I was working so hard on 2275. I was walking the floor, getting signatures, getting co-authors. I ended up having a majority of the House signed on to the legislation.
You had 88 authors.
I worked hard on that bill. And there was one day where I was trying to work on it and I got stopped in my tracks because I realized that my chair on the Public Health Committee was planning to vote out a bill that attacked trans kids. And I had to put down my infrastructure bill and go work and try to stop that vote from happening, try to change anybody's mind on it. And so the reason I bring that up is focusing on these culture war issues takes time away from us addressing the things that actually make a difference for Texans. Mm-hmm. We're going to go back for the special session in July. Absolutely anticipate that elections will be on there. And we're all going to be in big fights about this election bill that's going to keep us from working on things like the grid, things like healthcare access, things like public education. And that's unfortunate. That's what Texans want us to work on. They want us to make sure that their kids have great schools. They want us to make sure that they can afford healthcare. They want us to make sure that we protect their right to vote. They don't want us to go fight over hyper-partisan issues. But the majority's been calling that play a lot this session. And it doesn't have to be that way. It was very different last session. You know, there still were controversial bills, but we spent way more time on public education than we did on those controversial bills. This past session, we spent more time on controversy than anything else. And it cost the people of Texas.
You know, let's see if during these specials, we can get ourselves back to the business of handling business for Texas. And that is, we need to focus on critical infrastructure. We need to focus on the things that affect most Texans, and stay away from culture wars, because it's not worth our time. Our time is best spent doing the things that are going to improve the state, doing the things that will improve critical infrastructure, because we have a major problem headed our way with infrastructure. And throwing out hand grenades about cultural differences is not going to fix the problem that we have with critical infrastructure. It's actually going to exacerbate it, because the problem won't be fixed. And when we experience an actual problem like we just did with Winter Storm Uri, we're going to be in a bad place. So thank you so much, Representative Zwiener, for coming in and for talking to us, for zooming in on the Zoom call. You've been listening to On the Record with Tiffany on 9:30 a.m. The Answer, and we love having people from all different walks of life talk to us about their point of view, because that's the only way that we learn and respect one another.